So I always used to be a pretty skinny kid. Like, I was known for being skinny. I'd always be teased for how small and skinny and underweight I was. And that just makes everything that happened afterwards all the more surprising. And you know, and you can still see this a few years ago if you go back and look at my videos from like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Like, I was pretty skinny, you know, especially when you compare with what happened afterwards. I weighed 140 pounds or less, you know, in most of my 20s. And that was generally the case until like 2-3 years ago when I started gaining weight, a lot of weight. And I've gone back and fact checked this with my wife, and she says that I started putting on the pounds right around the pandemic, which, you know, I assume is probably similar to a lot of you. And I indeed was gaining a lot of weight. I peaked probably around 190 pounds, maybe more, which, you know, given my height of 5'5", is a BMI of almost 30, which is the technical definition of obese. So I was literally obese, and I know people say, okay, BMI is actually kind of like an abstract, it's not really representative, like Arnold Schwarzenegger had a BMI of 32. Okay, but I didn't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And most people with a BMI of 30 don't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, I looked fat, frankly. Like, I look back at my wedding pictures, right? And I was just fat. There's no real sugarcoating it. My wife would rib me. She would say like, hey, you're looking kind of chubby. You know, I get comments from relatives and stuff like, you know, you're looking kind of chunky. You know, people in my videos would comment on it. I would kind of dismiss them because while I was gaining all this weight, I was actually working out more than ever. Like, I was exercising really vigorously, you know, daily CrossFit workouts. And I felt like I was pretty healthy. You know, I was lifting a lot of weights. You know, like my squat peaked at 315 pounds, which, you know, is a lot of weight. And I was thinking like, okay, well, actually all this weight is just muscle. You know, if there's a little bit of extra fat, like, who cares? It's fine. I'm very healthy anyway. It's, you know, fat but fit, as it were. But I just kept ballooning. You know, I may have even reached 200 pounds at one point. I wasn't really tracking my weight too closely, but it happened so slowly and stealthily that I barely even noticed. You know, I just kind of dismissed it as like, all right, well, it's whatever. I'm just getting stronger. Fine. It's like, who cares if I weigh a little bit extra? And also, I had become convinced by these pseudoscientific articles that it's actually impossible to lose weight because of the way your hormones work. It's scientifically impossible, so why even bother trying? And also, I just didn't want to lose the weight. I felt like, you know, I just want to be big and strong, right? I had this kind of complex from when I was younger, and so thin and scrawny. Hey, again, I'm gaining weight, like, you know, I'm getting bigger muscles, just getting physically bigger, a little extra fat. Like, who cares, right? That all changed when a few months ago, I hung out with some professional sumo wrestlers. Now, most of you probably didn't see this video. It didn't do particularly well on my channel, but the impact on my life personally was actually tremendous because I really enjoyed that experience, but I found their lifestyle to be, frankly, incredibly unhealthy. I mean, I just looked at all the food they were eating, all the soda that they were drinking, they were smoking too. I just saw like their excess body weight, and to me it was really gross. And to me it just felt unhealthy because yes, they were constantly active and working out, but at the same time, you know, I remember we were training with them. They would like move for 5 minutes and be profusely sweating, their entire body just dripping with sweat, you know, from like a couple lunges. You know, they had like knee injuries, and it just seemed to me like that excess weight was really unhealthy. And I started seeing some of that in myself as well. I just noticed how over the years, I myself had become more slow and quicker to sweat, and also more prone to injury. My joints would get hurt more easily. I just reflected on the sumo wrestlers, and I looked at myself and I said, well, I'm not there yet, but on the path that I'm going, like, I'm gonna end up 250 pounds, 300 pounds. Especially because, like, frankly, at the time, I had somewhat of a problematic relationship to food. The reason that I got to where I was all diet. Again, like, I was working out like crazy, but after I came home from working out, you know, I'd just be super hungry, and I would just let myself eat essentially whatever I wanted, like as much as I could eat before getting full, and I would just stuff it all in my mouth in 10 minutes, and like I was just so hungry. Frankly, I just couldn't stop myself. So I just stuffed myself to the limit. And like, if you look back at pictures of my old breakfasts, like I'd be stuffing myself with like multiple pieces of toast slathered in butter, plus cheese, plus kimchi, and like meat or fish. It just was a lot of food that I was eating every single day. I mean, this is what I would eat in the morning, and I had absolutely no restriction on what I ate. I just let myself eat whatever I wanted, and I just kind of naturally ballooned outwards. And I started doing some research into sumo wrestler life expectancy because I was very curious to see like where it ends up with these guys. This is like a scientific experiment of the idea that fat but fit is okay. And so I looked into it, and what I found was that it does not end well for sumo wrestlers. You know, they die very young, like in their 60s, you know, relative to a Japanese population overall that, you know, lives quite long, like 80 plus years. So for me, it was just a perfect refutation of the idea that fat but fit is actually healthy. And look, like, I don't want to put this as a normative judgment on you if you feel like it's okay to be fat, because I frankly don't care. Like, you can do what you want with your life, but for me, I felt very strongly about this, especially after having 2 kids. I wanted to try and live as long as possible. Like, that became very important for me. I just felt like long term, the path that I was going down was not very healthy. And so I decided, like, seriously to start losing weight. This was maybe about 4 months ago when I decided to seriously start losing weight. You know, my weight at that time, I remember, was 187 pounds. As of this morning, I'm under 150 pounds, so I've lost a good 40 pounds. And for many people, the first thing that comes to mind when they think about losing weight is exercise. But I had already learned that exercise was not a stepping stone to losing weight. In fact, for me, it was the opposite. Like, the more I exercised, the more weight I gained because the hungrier I got and the more that I allowed myself to eat. So my big realization was that it was 100% diet. The stuff that I was eating before was, you know, I already talked about the breakfast I was eating, you know, full of like multiple pieces of toast or bagels or lots of butter and cheese and multiple eggs fried in butter, of course. That would be my breakfast. And then for dinner, again, I would just let myself eat whatever I wanted, and it usually ended up being like big bowls of cheesy pasta, you know, or like the most delicious pizza I could get my hands on. Just like really rich, fatty foods, which I somehow convinced myself was okay because saturated fat is all keto and good for you these days. And so the first thing that I did was I had a call with my nutritionist aunt. She was basically like, dude, the first thing you gotta do is eat more vegetables. It didn't really make sense to me at first because I was like, what do vegetables have to do with losing weight? Like, I didn't really get it, but I was like, okay, so I'll humor you. I'll eat some more vegetables. And so I started, like, with every meal, a half of the meal was vegetables to begin with. And that would be the first thing that I ate. So I started kind of like pounding vegetables, basically. And what I realized pretty quickly was that it actually is a great way to lose weight, because what you're doing is you're filling your body with like nutritious fiber, and you're crowding out room for all the other like rich fatty foods. You're kind of filling yourself up in advance. Because I realized what the root of my problem was is that I would just let myself eat as much rich and fatty food as possible, and I would be absolutely stuffed with every meal. And so my goal became to like be more comfortable with hunger. And so the vegetables turn into a critical part of that, because, you know, I'd start off my meal with like a plate full of vegetables or spinach or peppers, and it wouldn't exactly fill me up, but it would at least like take the edge off my crazy hunger. And then for the rest of the meal, like, I experimented with a lot of stuff, but what I ultimately ended up on was, this is kind of an extreme diet, but it worked for me. Most of my carbs, rather than coming from grains, came from whole, recognizable beans or legumes. I eliminated all processed carbs from my diet, So no more bread. I completely stopped eating bread. No more cookies, no cakes, nothing like that. No soda, obviously. No candy, any processed foods of any kind. That wasn't a huge problem for me before, but bread was a big problem. And so what I replaced it with was just essentially these sort of like slow carbs, like chickpeas. I ate a lot of chickpeas, lentils. A typical meal for me would look like a bowl of spinach, lentils, which also have protein, by the way, plant source fat. I liked olive oil, so I ate a lot of olive oil, sometimes peanut butter. I tried to have less animal protein, but I did eat lean protein, so that would usually either be fish or chicken. No sauces of any kind, so like, I mean, apart from the olive oil, no hot sauce, no oil, no other oil, no vinegar, nothing. Just like plain boiled spinach and chickpeas and sometimes potatoes. And this started to become my diet day in and day out. This also totally exploded for me the myth that healthy food is more expensive and or takes longer to prepare, because all of these meals took under 5 minutes to make with stuff that comes straight out of a can. Over time, I did start to become more experimental with what I ate, so I wasn't just eating chickpeas and lentils every single day. I'd throw in some corn, I'd throw in some peas, but the core, and still to this day, the core principle for what I was to eat just became whole foods, like as minimally processed as possible, calorically dense foods. I tried to eliminate to the maximum extent possible. Less fatty meat, more whole grain carbs like oatmeal. And when you think about processed foods, you often think about things like soda or packaged snacks and cookies and things like that. But the reality is, like, processed foods includes a wide variety of things like bread. Like if you go into a supermarket and look at bread on the shelf, all these supermarket breads will have ingredients like, you know, xanthan gum and all kinds of emulsifiers and fillers and things which I subsequently learned actually promote overconsumption of the food, and that was a huge problem for me, was overconsumption. Some of these meals, like if you look at them, they seem frankly a little bit unappetizing, but that was actually the point. I wanted to eat food that was as kind of unappetizing, but nevertheless still healthy as possible. Jack LaLanne, the famous bodybuilder from decades ago, had this great phrase, if it tastes good, spit it out. And that sort of became my motto. I felt like it was a pretty easy way to lose weight if the food became much less appetizing, because I always really enjoyed to eat. You know, it was a problem for me because I enjoyed eating so much that I would stuff myself with every meal. And so I tried to make the food deliberately less appetizing. I mean, not gross, just, you know, like basic healthy food. I feel like one problem with our modern society is how good our food has become, frankly. The range and quality of things you can eat has expanded so much. But if you look at, you know, hunter-gatherer societies, even today, what do the Hods eat? You know, they eat tubers and like occasionally poorly cooked animal meat. I mean, it's like their diet is not very appetizing. You don't want the food to be too good, because if it's too good, you overeat. And so that became a core part of my ethos. I started weighing myself every single day. I mean, I started losing weight immediately. But, you know, like the first week I lost like several pounds. Here I am, having lost 40 pounds 4 months later. And it honestly, it feels really good. You know, I do miss being able to stuff myself with incredibly delicious food on a regular basis. But I also recognize that that's sort of an unhealthy way to live. And, you know, I feel way better, frankly, not weighing as much. Like, I can move easier, you know, I sweat less, I sleep better, and hopefully I'll live longer as well. You know, and occasionally here and there now, I will eat the delicious foods that I like. You know, I will eat a slice of pizza, but it's much more rare that I do these things. And when I do, I also now, I know when to stop as well. Like if I'm eating something incredibly delicious, I know to stop before it becomes too much. If I've eaten a little bit and I still feel an immense urge to keep eating, I will force myself to stop, even when I'm eating that, you know, delicious bowl of pasta. And then, you know, surprise, surprise, 20 minutes later, I'm feeling full. So I've gotten more comfortable with being hungry, or to put it another way, being not completely stuffed all the time. Oh, and no alcohol, candy, snacks, any ultra-processed foods ever. I think that should go without saying if you're really serious about losing weight though.